Thank you everyone for joining us for this DevOps chat. I'm really excited that Liz Keogh has offered to be our special guest for this one and talk about behavior-driven development, but also about a wide range of other related topics that have influenced her thinking about behavior-driven development. So welcome, Liz.
Hi, thanks for having me, Dave.
Great pleasure. Perhaps before we talk about behavior-driven development and the other topics, it would be great if you could just tell us a little bit about what your background is and what you're interested in at the moment and what you're working on currently.
Sure. So my background, I used to be a dev. I'm now an independent consultant. I've got it's over 17 years in the industry now. So I've done everything from really, really heavy analysis, waterfall in the early days, through to some of the most extraordinary XP stuff at ThoughtWorks. I left about 7 years ago to become an independent coach. So I've got a background mostly in Java and C#. ThoughtWorks was where I actually came across BDD. So Dan North presented his very, very early and slightly broken version of JBehave to ThoughtWorks in the week I joined. And I tried to use it and, of course, ended up getting it working, which got me on the team, that's how I got into BDD in the first place. What am I doing these days? Cynefin has been a massive influence for me. So I'll talk a little bit about what that is, I'm sure, later. A really important part of Cynefin is safety. And I'm doing a lot of work around the language we use at the moment, trying to help people adopt a better language that produces a culture of flow and of safety. So positive language and looking at people and their potential and looking at relationships between people as well, since that's what allows work to actually flow.
Okay, so that's it's all really interesting stuff. I suppose it might be useful, perhaps, if we can, briefly to just explain what you mean when you talk about BDD, behavior-driven development, because I don't think it'll be a term that's familiar to everyone. Although I think, when we look at DevOps and the way people want to work for DevOps, it's highly relevant. So again, is it possible to give a quick idea of a flavour of what
absolutely.
BDD is?
It's using examples in conversation to illustrate requirements, illustrate the behaviour that you're looking for. The idea is that it should be slightly fuzzy. It should be something. So I did a whole thing on the 3 heads of BDD. So exploration by example and then specification by example. And it gives you tests from those examples as a nice byproduct. So there's kind of 3 bits that you move through, and often you kind of go back and forth between those. And the conversation's just a really nice, lightweight way of doing analysis. There's tools around which then take those examples, those scenarios that you've created, and you write them down in English, and you write them down using this particular given, when, then template. So, for example, I say, given Fred bought a microwave and it cost £100, when Fred brings the microwave back for a refund, then he should be given £100. And you can imagine something that would actually take your till software and run that as a test that the till software could do refunds. I'm really, really focused on the conversational aspects of BDD. I've helped write the tools. I love the tools, but without the conversations, it's not BDD. So the conversations really are at the heart of it for me. So the whole point is this lightweight, very human, very communication-focused approach to delivering software.
Right. So
I've also used it for stuff that isn't software.
Yeah. So do you see it as partly about the way you define the requirements by using examples and conversations, and then part of that is about how you then, I was going to say write them down, that's probably the wrong way of saying it, but in a way that can then be used to generate some automatic tests?
Yeah, so automated tests come out of the far side of it if you're doing it with software, and if you're doing it with something that can actually be automated, because obviously if you've only got one big bank mainframe, maybe you can't.
Maybe you can't. Okay.
You can mock things out and stuff like that. Yeah, so I think of it as illustrating the behaviour that you're looking for. The exploration is part of it. So if you go in intending to say, I have these requirements, help me define these requirements, you're probably going to end up with very contractual given, when, then style. I much prefer to just say, can you give me an example of that? Okay, what about this context? What about this other context? And testers particularly are brilliant at finding the context you haven't thought of, the stakeholders who have outcomes you haven't considered. And what happens is you decide what's in and out of scope, you decide which stakeholders need to be included, which ones it's just going to be a checklist for them, so it's boring, you understand it, which ones you're actually going to need feedback on. And sometimes you might find that you're not really sure what the outcome should look like. And Cynefin, as I said, it's been a big influence on that side of things for me, and handling uncertainty with BDD. So less defining to start with, more exploration. And it's okay to get them wrong, and it's okay to throw things in and out. Once you've had a go at it and you've written some scenarios down, show them to somebody, say, here's what I captured from that conversation. How's that? Is that what we talked about? For anyone wondering, devs, you should be doing the writing. I know you think it's slow. I know you hate it. Do it anyway, because it's the only opportunity you'll get to get feedback on that understanding before you actually start coding. So yeah. So
again, you've mentioned Cynefin a few times there. And I think I think it'd be great if you talk a bit more about it, because it's one of those things that I saw you present on in, I think it was the end of 2014, and I didn't get it. I just kind of went, don't understand. And then I saw you again in 2015, and then so after that, it was like I almost couldn't look at anything in life without thinking about that. And so it had a big impact on me, but I was perhaps a bit slow to really get it, if that makes sense. I just didn't understand.
It took me a few times since Dave Snowden before I got it. So it's a way of approaching different situations and problems depending on how much certainty there is in them. So if you take your most obvious boring problem, something that either a child can solve, or if it does require expertise, the solution is obvious. So let's say I go to my landlady in pub, I go, what do you do if the beer runs out? And she says, well, I change the barrels, obviously. It's like, duh, right? It's one of those problems. You can categorize it. You can go, it's one of those problems. But as things become more and more complicated, they're still predictable, but they require expertise. So you can think of things like GPS systems, very well understood. We know how they work. I don't know how they work, but somebody does.
Someone does,
I can find out. There's books on it. I remember copying some code off a website. I don't understand it, but it works. Right? So you can analyze those problems, and that's perfect BDD territory. BDD is an analysis tool, first and foremost. It's, you're communicating to understand what's needed. And that is analysis, even though it's fuzzy, even though it's lightweight, it's still analysis. So you're going to get predictable outcomes out of it. But sometimes outcomes aren't predictable. And this is what we call the complex domain. And it's the one which trips most people up. So in the complex domain, cause and effect are only correlated in retrospect. You can see how you got there, but you couldn't possibly have predicted it. So most people on agile projects are used to this. You show something to your stakeholders and they go, oh, okay, well, can you tweak that and do that? That's not going to work, is it? And they change their mind. It's the whole reason why agile works well. So you get these emergent outcomes. And the thing you have to do is try something out. We call that probe in complexity thinking. You have to probe the space, and you're doing it to try and get more information. And as you get more information, gradually you understand the problem. And as you understand the problem, you develop expertise in it. In fact, now it's moved. It actually moves to the complicated space. So there's a lot of dynamics in Cynefin that are as important as the domains themselves. And I think in the early days, I didn't really talk about those dynamics enough. And I think it's possibly why people get lost in it. But just about everything that's innovative, you can see that little cycle, so think camera phones, a camera on a phone. It used to be something really, really new. And then it became something that was really well understood. Everybody knew how to make the lenses. Everybody knew how to make the software. They're now made by third parties. So nobody makes their own camera lenses anymore. They go get them all from China. And as a result, that you can now build on that very well understood, commoditized, but complicated structure, and you get further innovations like Pokemon Go. Now, you couldn't have predicted Pokemon Go,
No.
right? The success of it, I've not played it myself. It does look fun. It looks time-consuming. It's great, but it's getting people outdoors. It's wonderful. I think that's the most awesome thing, is that this innovation cycle where you're building on the complicated stuff and creating new things and trying things out and seeing what works and what doesn't, and you get these surprising things happen. So that's the complex domain. The reason it trips everybody up is because human beings have this innate desire for certainty. And particularly with BDD, I find people try and define scenarios, even if it's brand new. You've never done it before. It's the latest music app, whatever. It's brand new UI. Instead of doing BDD with it, have a bit of a conversation, but you don't even need to worry about capturing the scenarios just yet. Just try something out, right? Get a spike going and show it to somebody. Get the UI up and running, even if it's just hard-coded with no behavior behind it at all.
Yeah.
Get some feedback on it. Whatever aspect is new, it's going to be complex. It's going to be high discovery. And you don't want to be committing to things which are high discovery. You don't want to be making heavy investments in those, because you probably got it wrong. I learned from all my years of doing waterfall, it's absolutely impossible to predict requirements up front, and that's because we're always doing something that's either new, completely new, or it's new for our organization. It's never been done in our context before. It's a capability that either our staff don't have, or our users don't have, or our back-end systems don't have. Something within our organization or who uses our organization doesn't have it yet. So you're going to make discoveries, and BDD is a nice light way of working out whether you understand it or not. You'll hear people get really confused over outcomes, trying to work out whether a stakeholder's outcome needs to be included yet. And really, if you're having those discussions, if you're having those arguments, try it out. Make a spike, make a prototype. One of the anti-patterns I keep seeing with BDD is people saying, oh, you've got to have clear acceptance criteria. And you frequently find it's a little explicit process policy on the column. Says, it can't pass this line without clear acceptance criteria and scenarios written. So as soon as you do that, what happens is it pushes all the most valuable bits of the project to the end of the project, when you've got much less time to react to them. And they're also the riskiest bits. They're the bit you're going to make most discoveries in, and now you've got much less time to react to what you discover,
So I suppose, is what you're saying that if you have risky pieces of work or stories that there's a lot of uncertainty around, and effectively you need to try something out, then those are precisely the ones that you would want to do early on to get that feedback.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
If you actually insist on certainty before starting them, then they will naturally wait until the end when you think you'll have more certainty, but you may well not have more certainty.
And that's an example of Cynefin's middle domain, which is what we call disorder.
Right. Okay.
Disorder is a domain where we don't know which one dominates, so we behave according to our preferred domain. And in software, the typical anti-pattern is to treat something complex as if it's complicated, and to ask, try and nail it down and pretend that you've got expertise over it, even though you've never done it before. Nobody's ever done it before in this context, So there's a question I always ask when I do my talks, and I am explaining Cynefin, which, put your hand up if you've ever been asked for an estimate of time or money for something you've never done before. And usually a few people put their hands up. And then I say, okay, keep your hands up if you gave one. And I see more hands go up. Oh yeah, I see, I remember that. And then you go, okay, keep your hands up if that got treated as a commitment or a promise. And everybody in the room's got their hands up, right?
Yeah.
Because everybody suffered this. That they are trying to force through certainty on something which is not certain. You've got to try it out.
And do you have some views on why people feel this need? So I suppose one thing I've seen is that people, if the requirements turn out to be wrong, they think, oh, we must get better at defining requirements. You don't so often see people say, well, actually, maybe we could never have known the full requirements at the start. So why do you think we have that need in our industry or as people to better define things?
It's fear of the fourth main domain of Cynefin, which is chaos.
Right.
So chaos is accident and emergency and bleeding to death, and you've got to act and act quickly, and it's panic and it's uncomfortable and it's working late nights and weekends because you didn't get the requirements right. The thing is, you can't get the requirements right. The only way to get them right sometimes is just try it out and to iterate. And that's how you're going to have to do it. So the more you push that stuff to the end, the more likely you are to end up in chaos. And I found that when disorder persists, it does end up in chaos.
Right. Okay.
Just to give an example of a different dynamic there, not reading the instructions on something which is not safe to fail. I've done that. I wrote a whole blog post called Disorder or How I Got a Black Eye, which was me not reading the instructions or something, So disorder isn't just treating complex as complicated. It could be any domain
where you don't really know which domain you're operating in, and so you default to probably your preferred approach to a particular
absolutely.
And a couple
People are scared of failure. They're scared of failure.
Yes,
just in here we're scared of it. I keep telling people we've got this that won't work because syndrome. So I had a coach write to the mailing list and said, anybody got anything that will help with this product owner? She doesn't really understand her role. I said, sure, I've got this document. And he immediately said, that won't work because, even though it's completely safe to fail. So you can see the failure scenario. So instead of trying it out to see if that failure scenario is going to happen or not, and maybe you get more information trying it out, you're now learning from that little probe. He's avoiding doing the probe in the first place. And I think it makes people scared of trying things. There's tons of books out there, so, about facing your fear and the joy of failure and why you should fail. But what I think people should really look for is it actually okay if you fail? Is there actually a problem? Is there a safety net you could put in place so that it would be okay to fail? And sometimes for managers particularly, it's as simple as saying, give it a try. It's okay to fail.
I mean, I remember one a team I used to manage, and we would often be looking at, so we'd have retrospectives and we'd look for ways to improve. And actually I don't know quite what caused the change in mind shift, but gradually we started to be more and more able to say, maybe we could do this, and you know what, if it doesn't help, we'll stop doing it. and of course not everything is safe to fail, but often if you think in those terms of, well, what's the worst that could happen? Actually, it's not very bad, so let's try it. And I can't actually think of a thing that we ever did go back on. So it's a lot of stuff where we could have spent hours debating it or not done it, and actually it was better to just try it and see if it works, and if it didn't, adapt it. So it's a very interesting point that it's a kind of, as you say, it's people are scared. If they are scared, then they won't want to try things, even when actually the risk is relatively low. A couple of times you've also talked about commitment and risk and options. And another thing that you introduced me to, I remember you saying, buy this book, have a read. It's the quickest kind of way you'll learn about real options. So I eventually got round to buying it, and I was, as I've told you, I didn't know this. I was surprised when I turned the page and saw you actually starring in the book, because it's a graphic novel.
I'm on page 76.
I was going to say 76. I can find it here. So there you are, actually in the book, which is amazing. I've never. I don't know anyone else who has actually starred in a graphic novel. So it took me by surprise. It's awesome. But perhaps you could talk a little bit about real options then, and how that's influenced your thinking. Because I think it's another thing for me where once I'd read the book, I couldn't. Again, hardly anything in life seemed the same anymore once you've got that way of perceiving things. So again, how's it influenced your view of the world and of BDD?
So I'm very, very comfortable with this idea of paying to keep options open. And I try very hard not to make commitments that I can't meet, not to make commitments where there is uncertainty. These days I'm finding I'm using the word investment a lot. So the difference between a commitment and an investment might be something you're continually putting your time into or continually putting money into, whereas commitment is more like jumping off a cliff.
Right, yeah.
You can't undo it, right? An investment you can just stop at any point, but a commitment you don't have any choice but to keep going. So an investment might be doing a lot of analysis work, and at any point you can go, you know what, we've done enough analysis work now, let's try some of this. But you've already, that's the investment you've made. A commitment is going live without rollback. You know, and I did that. The Guardian these days has got rollback, but I was on the Guardian when we went live and we didn't. And if we found a bug in production, we had to fix it. We made the commitment, you know. So these days, of course, the Guardian has beautiful DevOps and releases several times a day. We were struggling to release once every couple of weeks. And again, it's largely about getting fast feedback on things. So getting information and reacting to it really quickly. So there's kind of two sides to the real options uncertainty. And the other side is something Down North came up with called deliberate discovery.
Right. Yeah.
So that whole thing of probing to get more information, you're deliberately discovering what you need before you make your investments, before you make your commitments. And that discovery can itself be expensive, but you're paying to keep your options open. So just as a kind of slightly techie example, I was on a .NET project. We were trying to decide between nhibernate and link over SQL self-existence there. And they're both slightly heavyweight. We didn't really have enough knowledge of which one was going to be the one that would suit us in the end, because we didn't have many requirements for persistence there. We had like one flag per user, I think it was. So we went with this thing called simple data, which is absolutely awful to maintain. So there's no way it would last for very long. But it was, for that tiny bit, it was very quick to knock up. And something Chris Matz, who's one of the authors of Commitment, said is, if you can't decide what the right way is, pick the one that's cheap to change. Because then if it's wrong, it's easy to change. And it's right, well done. And the number of times we've done something small and hacky that turned out to be perfectly enough for that go live, you know, and it kept our options open. I think people are scared of getting things wrong, so they make these premature commitments when actually you could just
take
choose something small. And it affects your life as well. So my boyfriend and I moved into our last place and said, you know, well, where shall we put the TV? It's like, well, the plug socket's over there. Let's put it by the plug sockets, and if we have to run the cables around the room, we'll do that later. We'll move it and then we'll run cables around the room. But I don't want to do that and then find out that it's wrong. This way, at least, it's cheap to change.
And I think that's the great, I think it is it's almost liberating when you start to think about, is that really a commitment, or is it something I could choose to change in the future? And also what you've touched on there about rollback, also, are there ways I can change this instead of it being a commitment to it being an option? So I can, rather than committing to putting this in production, I have the option of effectively of keeping it in production, or I have the option of rolling back, and that and that has some value. That and I think that's the key with real options. Suddenly you think of the option has a value to it, and so it doesn't seem so bad. Because I think that's the objection to, say, rollback is, well, we're going to write all these scripts, that's effort, and we might not need it because we might not need to roll back, so why bother? And the why bother is because you've bought some value, because you've now got a choice where you didn't have a choice before. So it's really
exactly,
you know, and I keep telling people that, and I only read it a month ago, that it's in some ways it's all really basic and simple. It's like, has it really changed how I think about something? But what it does do is make it much quicker to make those decisions, because you are instantly thinking, right, is this a commitment, is it an option? Is it a commitment I'm happy about? Can I turn it into an option if I'm not happy about making the commitment? And you can rattle through that very, very quickly.
Right.
Sorry, go on.
I remember when we were first talking about this, I warned you that I would say DevOps is a really good start.
Yes.
Do you remember?
Yes.
When you start actually looking at the investments and the commitments being made outside of the technical space, things like yearly budgeting cycle.
Yeah.
You know, when you understand DevOps in terms of commitments and investments and opening up of options, you can start seeing how to apply the same strategies to the business. Smaller releases. Oh, well, that smaller budgets, right? So you're essentially keeping your options open for budgets. And I found that language then allows Agile to scale.
Right.
That's how you scale agile. It's
yeah.
by looking for the calories of commitment and looking for where you want to get fast feedback on whether things are working. And okay, fast means 3 months rather than 2 weeks. But it still allows a business to make good choices. And Kanban is, I really love Kanban across the board. There's a thing that David Anderson's doing at the moment called Enterprise Services Planning.
Yep, yep.
It's like Kanban on steroids. It's extraordinary to see what flow looks like when it's a whole organisation and their organisational strategy. And they've got visibility of where the risk is and where the value is. And there's more than I can talk about in this talk on that, but it's the equivalent of DevOps for the business.
So it's a way, of scaling it up. And as I think you're hinting at there, it's starting to think about work in terms of the risk profile rather than thinking let's work out exactly what we want 3 years in advance and then have a budget for 3 years and commit to building that thing in 3 years' time. So
exactly.
I guess, yes,
exactly that.
DevOps is a start in terms of giving you some agility for the development and the operation and maintenance of software. But what you really, I suppose, what businesses potentially are aiming for is to make the whole business more agile and responsive. So I'm not, in no way am I an expert on enterprise service planning, so I've only seen David Anderson talk about it at conferences. I mean, I love Kanban. I think it's fantastic, and I think a lot of the work in that space is brilliant to see. I suppose just because I'm conscious of time now, so I think it's very interesting talking to you about behavior-driven development, because I think for many people this would seem like a technical subject, and I suspect a lot of people, if they wanted a piece of, said let's get our teams doing behavior-driven development, they might start with Cucumber and let's and that side of things. So I've
got a whole blog post on BDD before the tools and things you should have in place.
Right,
it's called BDD before the tools,
and it's characteristic of DevOps as well, where a lot of people talk tooling and think automation, and actually a lot of it is about, I'd say most of it is people interactions.
Get your dev person and your ops person and go, hey ops person, when we release this, what do you need from us?
Yes
And how can we be sure that we're getting that to you? What kind of steps do you want to put in place? What can we help you with? What can you, so everything's about relationships. Everything in the flow is about making sure that the next person in the chain has what they need to be able to deploy the thing to production and get the value of it to the users, or at least get the feedback from the users as to whether this is actually any good or not, or the business, because frequently it's the business profiting, obviously. Is it good? Is it working? It's why I love DevOps, just because you can get so much fast feedback on it. But if you want a place to start with BDD,
I was going to say, so this is the question I'd love to finish with.
The simple way to do it is that when somebody goes, I want this thing, you go, can you give me an example? And it's that simple.
Fabulous.
I do it all the time. People who know that I do it giggle when they hear me do it, because I really do it. So I'll go in as a coach, and people will say, we really, really want you to teach us BDD. We think it'll solve our problems. I'm like, okay, can you give me an example of a problem you reckon it'll solve? And automatically, I've got my own mental test now. Just that simply, I've got a test. Oh, okay, will this approach that I'm about to give you stand a reasonable chance because probes are only coherent and people are complex. Does it stand a reasonable chance of actually help solving that problem? Does it seem like that's a realistic thing to do to solve that example of that problem you've just given me? So I do BDD all the time now. Can you give me an example person,
Yeah. But that's fantastic. I mean, in some ways, that's brilliant, though, isn't it? Because it does mean getting started with BDD is perhaps easier than many, many people think. It's changing the way you think about a problem when someone asks you to do something. That's fantastic. I think that's just brilliant. So let's finish there. That's been an awesome conversation, and once again a ton of things that I'm now going to have to go away and read about and learn more about, but that's all good.
I'm sorry, but I'm not.
But yeah, thank you so much again for joining us, Liz, and really look forward to the Twitter chat later this week. So yeah, thank you.
Cheers, Dave.
Cheers.
Thanks
bye.
for having me again. Bye.